Good evening, everybody. This is absolutely one of the episodes of the Q&A where I sit here just before I record and I think, God damn it, why have I picked so many questions? I'm just going to feel bad because I'm going to rant on these questions and then I'm not going to get through them all, and in the end I'm going to be very sad. So I will try to be brief and get out the juicy details. But yes, so today, everybody, I'm going to be answering questions from you. If you've got any of your own as you listen, you can drop them in the comments down below. If you've been avoiding leaving YouTube comments, yeah, I'm looking at you because of the Google Plus integration, all that stuff. You might not realize about 2 months ago, 3 months maybe even now at this point, time moves very fast. The wise people over at Google did delink it, so you can use your account again for normal. Maybe ask me some questions if you hadn't been considering that before. The first one's from Zero Glace Zero, who says, "Hey WP, what do you think about civilization's interior where they've not experienced any sort of magic? I have an idea of an elementalist or something taking over a tribe, claiming to be a god with their powers. Is this possible, or has magic been introduced all around the world over the thousands of years?" This is actually a really interesting question, because magic general levels and exposure that races have to those levels is not kind of this uniform thing interior. There's actually a bit of story, and yes, it ties very heavily into the Elder Dragons. So first of all, there are some races out there, I would say even to this day, that really don't tap into magic, don't use it, and specifically when you think beyond like intelligent races or even semi-intelligent races like Ettins or Grawl, you know, which we see some marginal use, what you may actually then think about too is like deers or frogs or sparkflies or, you know, any random ambient like rabbits and stuff. These things don't necessarily have magic, and actually it's a story we haven't really tapped into, really. It is the idea of these, you know, maybe there's a rabbit that somehow learns how to use magic. You know how in the real world there might be a rabbit that learns how to, I don't know, get you a beer from a fridge. Okay, maybe a rabbit wouldn't learn that, but you get the idea. There's like these slight chances at things like that. But yeah, so there certainly are things that are that won't tap into the magic. But the overall story is actually leaving a lot of space for intelligent civilizations to have no access to it whatsoever. And why? Because the way the Elder Dragons work. When you first learn of this idea in Guild Wars 2, that the Elder Dragons are eating magic, it happens in one of the Asuran personal story quests, right when you choose to join an order, and Professor Gore is stood up on a stage, and he says, "I have a theory. The theory is the Elder Dragons are eating magic." And dissenters in the crowd say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Magic is a closed system. It's a closed loop. It can't just be destroyed. It just can't be eaten by the dragons." And the funny thing about this scene is that actually both Gore and this person in the crowd are correct. It is a closed loop, but the Elder Dragons are a part of that loop. They sap energy from the world, magic from the world, and they will eat it, and they will destroy it. And for, you know, the prospective lifetimes of everyone alive on Tyria right now, once an Elder Dragon has consumed that magic, it is gone, and it is sincerely damaging to our current ways of life. But once the Elder Dragon falls asleep again, leaving nothing, a wasteland in its stead, it will start to leak that magic back out. And so what this means is that period of time shortly after the Elder Dragons fall asleep, that period of time is a period of time where no one really has access to magic. It's all pent up and tied in these Elder Dragons, these desolated, horrible, corrupted areas that no living thing can go near. And it will take, you know, several thousands of years before that magic starts to seep back out and races can sort of safely be around there. And that's what we saw, for example, in Ore. It was said that of the humans, the Orions were the greatest masters of magic and had this great proficiency with magic. And why is that? Well, the theory would go because obviously they were on a sleeping Elder Dragon. And so you might be wondering, okay, we know that things can survive without magic, in theory, without using magic. There's nothing that necessarily says you die without magic. But the story they're really going for here is magic seeps out into the world, and races like the Asura are a fantastic example. The Asura learn to use that magic for everything. They integrate into the damn rock for their buildings, for their structures. You know, the main bastion of their civilization right now is Ratasuma, a giant floating cube of magic. And so the idea is that races in general begin to use a lot more magic, they integrate into their lives, and then the Elder Dragons come, they are targeted specifically for that reason, they are attacked, and in the wake of the Elder Dragons, those stragglers who are left suddenly don't really know how to handle themselves. You know, I guess it's maybe when you get really deep down, maybe you got some inspiration in the real world, you know, our current reliance on technology and electricity and all the systems that our societies give us to allow a person like me to live a life like this where, you know, I earn a living from my own house, right? So maybe they're kind of trying to tie into that kind of thing, and this is why when the magic will get destroyed, that it's so damaging to those on Tyria. And you can look at a race like, say, the Jotun, who were once very wizened and intelligent and proficient with magic and gazing at the stars and so forth, you know, once that's stripped away from them by the Elder Dragons, they lose it all. And then to go to your question, yeah, after you know this race like the Jotun Falls, you have civilizations that just sort of scrape sticks together. And in theory would have developed a lot like real-world societies would have here on Earth, where, of course, we don't have any magic. Another thing to consider with this question, too, is Canthan. Canthan could have been like one of these societies we saw after the fall of the previous Elder Dragons, and even though they were like very separate from the Elder Dragons and not necessarily using magic from them, we do see there is, despite everything I've just said, opportunity for magic to influence these cultures, because of course if you're not getting magic from the Elder Dragons, you can still theoretically get it from the Mists. And that's indeed absolutely what we saw the Canthans used to do. Their ritualists were doing precisely this, and this is kind of very Revenant-ish stuff that we see now in the second game. But GW1 definitely had this in spades, and that's kind of what the Canthans did. They had a different type of magic to what the Tyrians were using, and because they were pulling it right from the Mists. Rather than, you know, essentially the Elder Dragons and this closed circuit that is Tyria. Anyway, look, that's way too long for a question. Next question is from GS Man and My Smart, who says, "Hey WP, do you still play League of Legends?" Yeah, pretty big topic shift there. If not, what was your favourite champion? Just curious, because I noticed you talked about the game before in your discussion from the new PvP mode for Guild Wars 2. I mentioned it on occasion. I got very hooked on League of Legends, and actually, was it shortly after Guild Wars 2's launch? I played League of Legends a long time ago now. There have been several big updates to the shop and tons of stuff in that game. But the last time when I truly properly played League of Legends, it was around the time that Ahri was added to the game. I think the first champion to be added when I was playing was Wukong. This was when Wukong was added. It was a long time ago. Mostly I played... These were the champions I played. Don't judge me too hard. I played Karthus a lot. Karthus was my favourite AP carry. And I specifically really enjoyed not just the ult that would give you pentakills, but I really enjoyed mastering the auto attack for tags. I thought that was really, really cool, because a lot of other champs, like Kayle, you know, you just cleave through waves, and there was no play to it. But, you know, Karthus had kind of an interesting play there. I played a lot of LeBlanc in the later days. In fact, when I finally quit League of Legends, I went like 3 games in a row with just a disgustingly high kill-death ratio, where I got crazy fed and just did really well, basically as perfectly as I could expect to do. And I really wasn't getting much enjoyment out of it anymore. I was just feeling the lows and the upset and the frustration whenever I played a game where I didn't do well. And that was kind of when I ended up quitting the game. But my main character that I played more than anything else was Jax. I played Jungle Jax. And to this day, apparently, he still sees some use. So I'm pretty happy about that. That was my experience with League of Legends. More modern stuff to do with it. Really, I couldn't talk to you about. Moving on, you've got Jeff Hask, who says, "How the heck, Wooden Potatoes, do you manage to PvP without a minimap? It provides so much information, I can't help but think not having it is a massive handicap on yourself." And, you know, as well, you're quite polite about the way you asked me this question, but also a handicap on my team, right? Because if I handicap myself, surely I handicap my whole team. Is that fair? I would argue, you know, you're fair to say that that's not something I should do. I shouldn't show you guys footage of me PvPing without a minimap. But actually, if you watch the way I rotate in PvP, even in yesterday's video, where at one point I questionably went for a boss, I'm actually not rotating terribly. And specifically on some maps like Forest of Nifl, it teaches you very much to use your eyes and to look around, and it kind of increases your physical awareness, which can help you a lot when enemies don't appear on the minimap, and specifically with a lot of other small things. I do enjoy the experience. Now, if I was ever going competitive, if I was ever playing ranked, not unranked, or not hot joins, I would turn the minimap back on. But I enjoy it, man. I enjoy playing PvP without it, and I can toggle it on at any moment if I really need to, and you'll see I do that in the videos as well. This is kind of an interesting question, though, because it segues me weirdly onto something I've really wanted to do for a while. You guys know about immersive combat mode and its capability to turn off various elements of the user interface. One thing I've always really liked the thought of for now, I'm not a caster, right? I'm not a PvP caster. However, I've been watching a few more casts recently. One thing I've always really wanted that side of Guild Wars 2 to have is something like ICM doing the exact same thing, but instead of turning off elements of the UI to increase immersion, it's specifically targeted at people who want to cast the game and make it more spectatable. And there are a lot of different things you can do for that. You can turn the minimap off and actually replace it on your stream with a minimap that's using like the Guild Wars 2 APIs in theory. And then you could actually recolor certain icons so it's easier to see what node is in what state. More specifically, you can make it bigger. spectators often won't realize how important it is to get a perspective of the match and actually enjoy spectating Guild Wars 2's PvP conquest games. They have to watch the minimap closely, but a lot of the time it's very small and most of the screen's taken up by other stuff that the caster's looking at. So what you could importantly do is make the minimap much bigger while still having the general game's client interface size smaller. So you get the benefits of a bigger minimap so that people watching on Twitch can see it and really invest themselves in the match and understand, get that greater perspective, while also not cluttering the hell out of the screen with everything else. Can turn off other stuff too, like when you're watching a cast of a PvP match, you don't need like the XP bar or the glory bar down there at the bottom. You don't need that little button that says to leave the instance. You don't need like the artistic mess that they put around the sides of the screen. Even a lot of boons, right? They end up spamming up the screen with useless information. When you're watching a cast of a PvP match, you don't actually need, I would argue, you don't need to see if someone has swiftness on them or not. You don't. You can physically see if they're moving and whether they're going to avoid an attack, whether they're going to get to a node fast enough. By watching that play, you don't need to see that information that swiftness exists on them. And you could turn that off in theory if someone made a targeted tool like this. You could turn off some other of the more superfluous things as well. And what this would mean is you get much cleaner streams, much more visible, much more watchable streams. You could even take it a step further and maybe do something else where if stability would show, it instead shows it like as a red boon icon, so it's much more obvious, so those really important boons and stuff in those clutch moments are important, so that, it shows might normally, but if a team gets to like 25 might, then, it shows it in a different color so people can easily spectate and see that's going on. There's so much that could be improved over on the side of things, and it's something I've always thought about, but because I'm not really involved in it, I've never had reason to look much further into it. Anyway, that's a bit of a huge segue. Moving on, Daniel Burbridge says, WP, how would you like to introduce more lore to Guild Wars 2, specifically about things that are not currently big topics, but without adding traditional quests? That's a good question, because you guys know how much importance I put on traditional quests and how much I think that they could improve the game. To me, my go-to example here is the game RuneScape, and a variety of other, I suppose, point and clicks. But, what's really good about that title is that pretty much anything, you right-click with your mouse, you can inspect that element, and you'll get a little bit of flavor text about what it is. Even if it's something as basic as, right-click, this is a clay bowl on a table. Now, that might not seem like very much to you or I, but when you do that, like on a game-wide level, when you give people the opportunity to interact with more things, what you end up having is a lot more opportunities to just make the world feel bigger and more enriching. So maybe at one point you interact with a clay bowl, and you find out it was manufactured at Claypool. Clay, I don't know, right? But so in that way, it feels like, oh yeah, I'm seeing a little bit more of how Queensdale works. Earlier in the year, I did a video on some of my top requested features, if they were ever to do another feature pack, and I put the idea of a bestiary on that list. The idea that when you kill mobs out in the open world, you kill enough of them, you learn more information about them. This can help you mechanically see what their health is, for example, while you're fighting them, stuff like that. But also, it unlocks lore about those characters and lore about those creatures. And then, you can hear about the scale that specifically wander around the Queensdale Dam, and that they like a specific type of shrimp that come down from the Giant's Basin beyond the wall. And you just get these little bits of information that come in, and that enriches the universe, that enriches the world, that gets people more interested. That's what I do. I was asked on the stream the other day, what was my favorite moment of like the personal story, because I tend to rag on it so much. And my earliest experience of truly enjoying the personal story was when you play a human noble and you go to a hunting lodge in Queensdale, and when you go downstairs you find out that the White Mantle have been there. And why is this room so cool? Why is this personal story step so cool? Well, because there's tons of little things you can interact with. You can press F on this, and you get tidbits of information about the White Mantle. I would say it doesn't have to be on a big topic like the White Mantle. It can be whatever you want. That's how I would make the world feel more immersive and give more information on the lore to the game. Absolutely. Moving on, T.S. Balmer says, another question for your consideration. What do you think about terrestrial spears not coming with Heart of Thorns, even though they were in the end of Season 2 cinematic? I didn't buy the story about a disagreement with the art, at least at first, because that seemed like an amateurish mistake. And I thought the weapon might be announced later, but it looks like I'm wrong. What are your thoughts on the matter, looking back on it? I do think it was probably an amateurish mistake. And the reason I say this is because if there was actually a chance that spears were coming on any of the elite specializations, or in any capacity in Heart of Thorns, if there was actually a chance that was happening, they wouldn't have so quickly said to us, oh no, this is a mistake, sorry, they're not actually going to be here. What was it? We had the trailer, very shortly after we had PAX South and the reveal of the expansion, and it was on that day, in those initial statements about it, that they were already saying to us, yeah, spears, they're not a thing. I remember discussing a lot of it originally after those first trailers and a little bit on the post show with Matt when they first revealed the expansion, but then within a couple of days, I remember also then saying, oh guys, they've confirmed that spears aren't a thing. Land spears aren't coming to Guild Wars 2. So why would they do that? We know what this company's like. Everything's on the table, guys. But spears weren't on the table, so they knew damn well that it wasn't going to be there, and I think it genuinely was then just an amateurish mistake. I don't know whether we can say it's amateurish. It's probably just communication between different departments, as they said. You know, the guys doing the cinematic thought it'd look really cool to have these spears, and they didn't really appreciate that people would see that as something different to what it actually was, or whatever you want to call it. I just think it was, you know, it was a quirk of the way that cutscene ended up working. All right, if I'm wrong, okay, and they genuinely were thinking in the early days, okay, we're going to have spears and Heart of Thorns, and then by the time PAX South came out, they were like, no, we can't do it. Then what that would mean is there is a very serious complication out there with adding new weapons to Guild Wars 2. Like, and you can't even argue that, oh, it's because, you know, they don't want to add a new weapon because then they're going to have to go back through all the old skin sets in the game and create that weapon for them. You can't even say that for spears because there's already 1 million spear skins and all the animations for how to hold spears is already in the game. Not on land necessarily, I see you that. But the idea would be, you know, that they did want it and then something massive came up. Considering that, like, they gave warriors rage skills, I'm pretty sure druids won't get rage skills. They're probably going to get glyphs. So, you know, they've demonstrated to us that they will break a rule of thumb. You know, the rule of thumb that they can mix utility skills that already exist across all the classes was broken with rage skills. So why couldn't the other rule of thumb, all right, we're adding existing weapons just into new slots on new classes, also be broken when it came to, say, the Dragon Hunter and giving him a land spear instead of a longbow? Why couldn't that be broken? So yeah, I just think it was never on the table, and they always knew they wanted the Gen 2 ones to have it instead, and we'll get there in time. Next question is from Valgarian, who says, kind of an odd question perhaps, but given the general plant theory, would it have made more sense for ArenaNet to have switched around the day-night events in Verdant Brink? As in, maybe the plant people should be rampaging during the day, amidst the photosynthetic high, while shutting down a bit and giving the pack a chance to recuperate at night. Then again, maybe their biology is a bit different from standard plants, as Sylvari presumably can consume meat for sustenance, like Venus flytraps. I don't know, it depends a lot on the specifics of how Morgemorph spawn work biologically, I guess. I can't recall anything particularly relevant mentioned in the past about how dependent Sylvari are on photosynthesis or external food sources. Maybe this is just a random, ultimately inconsequential thought. The devs did talk about this. A lot of people had a lot of questions about Sylvari biology. It wasn't just all, sex, how do they do it? Why does Sylvari have boobs? There were some, you know, more serious questions like, how does this actually work with the light? So the explanation they've given us is that the sun and photosynthesis absolutely does happen with the Sylvari, and when they're out in the sun, they do feel rejuvenated. When they're in the cold climes of the Shiver Peaks, it does sap energy from them. This could be why Morgemorph finds it harder to influence those areas and, you know, set up some kind of conflict between Jormag and Morgemorph one day. But, you know, this is absolutely a thing. And so, yeah, maybe it could work with the Morgem too. Maybe the argument is that, you know, if you look at, like, the Morgem Guard, okay, the Sylvari that turn into Morgem, they change physically a lot, and because they get a lot more bark around them, bark doesn't actually participate in photosynthesis, and so maybe those photosynthetic processes, is that the way I should term that, kind of, you know, halts, and the Morgem prefers something else. Maybe this then feeds into their bloodlust and desire to eat and rip and destroy, okay? You know, that's probably the kind of thing that they're going for. But I do love this idea. And I think really when you come down to it on a conceptual, on a design level, not just looking for the lore excuse, what they probably just didn't want was all of the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, pristine jungle-looking areas during the day where we have a lot of lighting and the sun shines through the leaves and it looks all great. They didn't want all of those experiences and moments to be tarnished by the fact we're supposed to be really scared of Morgem all the time and under constant battle. And likewise, I doubt they wanted all of their favourite characters like Farron and so forth to only ever be running around during the night and in the dark, and then they don't really get to stand up and take center stage. So that's probably why they didn't do it, but it's a unique idea and something they could have ran with should they have wanted to. Next, we've got Devin Belver, who says, "Hey WP, I was exploring Ratassoon the other day, and I started to notice just how many vines there are that seem to entangle the city. Do you think all of these vines could actually be from Morgemorph and that the entire city is powered by the Jungle Dragon? If so, maybe there could be a cool storyline where the dragon uses this to his advantage to try to take the power back that Ratassoon is stealing." Well, we know, as I mentioned earlier in this very video, that the Asura did absolutely absorb energy from an Elder Dragon before with the construction of the Central Transfer Chamber, except it was Primordus. And while on a very basic level, we're all going to think, oh, Morgemoth pair with Sylvari, you know, in a lot of other ways, the dragons can pair with the other races. And I think having that kind of open, dynamic interchange between the races and the dragons, the way everything influences one another, is absolutely essential to telling a good story. I refuse to believe that nothing interesting or fun can happen in this expansion to the Asura just because, oh, this is supposed to be the Sylvari expansion. You know, it's that kind of really narrow-minded, annoying, strict, rule-based storytelling that leaves us with these horrible situations where we have 3 different mentors for each order and they all die in the same way for the exact same reason. And, you know, it's not realistic and it's not fun and it puts us off. So, yeah, I really like the idea, you know, that maybe the Asura, yeah, it's their proximity to Morgemoth that has allowed them to build Ratasum as they have. And specifically, I've never made the observation before that these vines are tangling all around the rocks, and now you've kind of put a far more sinister approach on that than I had ever really thought of before, so I appreciate that very much. I've talked a lot recently about the idea of Heart of Thorns ending with Ratasum cracking in half and falling to the ground, and then we get that as another explorable map, a full map, you know, all the areas around Ratasum as well as just a small cube in the center. But we'll see if ArenaNet does that in Living World Season 3. Moving on, you got Glitchy Poo, who says, hey WP, I've been trying to find a few examples of Canthan last names, but after searching on the wiki, it seems all the NPCs and factions only go by the first names. Do we even know of a naming convention for Canthan last names? There are Canthans with last names. Specifically, I think about Winds of Change. You had Zayri and so forth. A lot of the non-human races there as well, of course, had last names. If you think about the Tengu, the Angchu, the Sansali, they had very specific naming conventions that ArenaNet kind of reused a lot, to be honest. The Tengu naming convention for their second names was very similar to the Centaur naming conventions, which was very similar also to, was it the Grawl or the Ogres or something? Like, they all kind of followed this similar idea. But yeah, they definitely do have last names. They just might be a little bit rarer to find. I remember specifically when I started Let's Playing factions many years ago that I was really struggling figuring out their names and what they were all based on. I believe generally they're based on Chinese names? Or was it Japanese? I'm pretty sure it's Chinese. I don't know. I can't remember. I'm scared I'm being racist. Let's move on. Next question is from Morgoth Borglier, and kind of touches on something I was just mentioning, but to greater detail. Hey WP, I was wondering, what do you think about an expansion that focuses on each of the local races' enemies? Nightmare Corps, Inquest, Outlaws, etc. It could have things like elite specializations, where you learn to fight like an Inquest, for example. Thoughts? Okay, for the elite specialization idea, I like it a lot. They couldn't be too explicit about it, but, you know, they could say that the lore behind the elite specialization is somewhat inspired by a specific race, as we see with the Scrapper. But moving on to expansions that deal with, like, those local enemies. Now, I'm not saying no. I absolutely do want to see a lot more story with the local enemies. But again, I don't want this very plastic, cut-and-paste idea where ArenaNet set up the next 5, 6, 7 years of Guild Wars 2 with really mundane, basic premises of, okay, we're going to do an Asuran expansion next, and it's going to be about the Inquest. Then the Norn are going to get their turn, and it's going to be about the Sons of Svarnir and Jormag. And then the Char are going to get their turn, and we're going to find out what happened to Geher and Balefar. No, please. Please don't do that. I don't think anyone wants that. To ArenaNet's credit, I don't think they're doing that either, alright? So, like, look at the current one. Heart of Thorns, Sylvari, Nightmare Corps. We had some great news, some great lore-based news this week, specifically about the Nightmare Corps and how they are more nuanced than simply just joining up with the dragon, as we'll see, like, for example, we see with the Sons of Svarnir. So already it's more nuanced than that. But then again, in this idea that all the races can be affected, it's not just about the Sylvari. We have the idea in this expansion that the Inquest founder was Zin, whose base was in one of these locations we're going to visit in the Maguma jungle. So those stories are crossing over a little. Look at the human local enemy, the Outlaws as you call them, the Bandits, known to be connected somehow with the White Mantle. The White Mantle are probably going to appear in this first raid. We may be seeing some White Mantle member bandits with their flamethrowers. There were constant hints about the White Mantles and their badges and stuff in the Silverwastes and how they've quickly moved on and establishing the ideas of New Kryta and stuff. Heart of Thorns could end with a huge reveal about the Inquest. It could end with a huge thing to do with the Nightmare Court, yes, or it could end with the establishment of New Kryta. We really don't know, and that is the way that ArenaNet should do it. Fluid, interesting stories that become more about just copy-paste, 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 like we saw in the personal story. Alright, and so the very last question is from Ludology PhD, who says, Guild Wars trivia question, as we were talking about this idea last episode. What colour were Sin's panties? I'm pretty sure they were silver, weren't they? Guys, am I right? Am I right? I'm going with silver. Thanks for watching, guys. If you've got any questions of your own, leave them down below. And I'll see you next week for another Q&A.